Okay, so just before jumping into the main content of our session today, we want to encourage you to keep your cameras on. Sorry, if you go back, please. Um, so please keep your cameras on to create an interactive and lively vibe for this session, but please stay muted so that we can focus our attention on whoever is speaking. Doing your part in checking your own muted status will help our admins tremendously in making sure that everyone is muted and there are no distractions. Another reminder is to please change your Zoom display name to this format, the name of your organization dash your name. So you will see that some of us at the top of the list, the co-hosts would have that format. Please do change that so that we also know who are with us today. Okay. And again, to those who have just joined us, I think there are a few new names that have just come in. I just want to remind everyone that we are currently recording this session. So by staying on, you're giving your consent for to be included in this recording. Lastly, regarding content or slides, they will be only shared with our speaker's permission. Okay. So next is around our Q&A. It's important for us to note that we will be opening our Q&A platform using Mentimeter throughout the session. So feel free to use this tool to ask questions as we go. You can either direct your questions to speakers later on, or even just ask general questions to us, to NCSS, to the group, right? So you can do that by pressing that open Q&A button when you get into Mentimeter. And also you can upvote the questions that are asked by other participants if they are relevant to you. You can do that using the thumbs up button beside the appropriate question. So to join us on Mentimeter, please scan the QR code on your screen right now, or click the link on the that has just been pasted into the chat. Just note that the questions will be answered during our Q&A panel towards the end of the session. We won't be having a Q&A session after each speaker. I think this allows us to have a richer discussion around some of your questions with all of the speakers involved. Yeah. Okay, so next, we want to understand also why are we here today? For those who have not attended this series of events before, NCSS has been organizing the Volunteer Management Network in order to provide volunteer management practitioners such as yourselves opportunities to learn from each other, to learn from other subject matter experts, to share best practices, and to ignite collaboration. So we all have different experiences within our respective organizations. We serve different communities. We all have different skill sets as well. And I think this collective sharing of key learnings is a great way to grow the sector as a whole. And that's our goal. So this year we have 4 sessions lined up for all of you. So obviously we have the first session today, 20th of September. We have one in November, one in January, and one in March. So basically one session every 2 months. So please mark your calendars and stay tuned for more announcements from NCSS on the details of these sessions. Okay. So today our agenda is actually quite packed. Right after this, I will give you a recap of the pre-event survey that we answered during registration. This was done so that we can get a little bit of extra data points to contextualize our discussions today. And then I will hand over to Ken Soon from NCSS to give us a summary of the research study done by the Lien Centre for Social Innovation entitled Transforming the Volunteer Experience in the Social Service Sector. Yeah, so this will give us a good base to anchor some of the ideas and learnings that we will have today. After that, we have our first speaker, Lynette Kang from NLB, and she'll be sharing insights on what NLB is doing in relation to improving the volunteer experience. Similarly, our second speaker, Shikin Ahmad from Dementia Singapore, will share her learnings from working with different types of volunteer groups. And after that, we will take a short break, stretch break. We'll resume after that with an interactive activity and an opportunity for us to take a nice group photo. That will be followed by our third speaker, Natalie Craig from CNW Services. She'll give us a corporate perspective this time on how they are also improving their own volunteer experience for their employees. And after Natalie, that's when we get all the speakers back together during the Q&A panel, and then we can start answering your questions. Finally, we aim to finish all of this by 5 p.m. which is, again, a lot to do before 5 p.m. But I hope, this overview of our flow today has gotten you excited for what we have in store for you. Okay, so first we'll start with the pre-event survey recap. Just want to share to everyone that when we designed the pre-survey questions that you answered as part of the registration process, our objective was to get a better understanding of different types of organizations and people that we have here today. So first, we asked what are the types of volunteer work that that your volunteers typically engage in, or the work that you provide. And it seems that most of you are involved in service-based volunteerism, where volunteers regularly come in and provide some kind of service. If we look at the age ranges of the main volunteer groups, there also seems to be a relatively even distribution of age ranges. We allowed people to answer multiple responses to this, and it seems like most of our volunteer groups are coming from people around the working age. Next, we also looked at the bigger challenge in your organization, whether that's attracting or retaining volunteers. And it seems that currently both attracting and retaining volunteers seems to be of equal weight, with a slight edge towards retaining the volunteers, right? Slight edge meaning, I think more people think that retaining volunteers is something that's just a little bit harder to do. Now, to also understand what your volunteers think about their experience working with you, we also ask whether you collect feedback and how often that is done. It seems like there's a bit of like two sides of the spectrum here. We have many organizations that collect feedback after every volunteer session, and also quite a number that also collect on an annual basis. I think we also allowed people to answer multiple responses to this one. So it seems like maybe there are some organizations that collect after every session and also collect annually. We also note that about a quarter of you currently do not collect much feedback from your volunteers. So hopefully this session helps provide some of the insights so that you can help that can help you better understand your volunteers. Yeah. Okay, lastly, we also asked, based on the feedback collected, which of the following dimensions or features do you think your organization does best or needs to improve on the most? And in the survey, we described these dimensions a little bit. Actually, Ken will talk about these in more detail in his segment. But just to kind of recap what we have here so far, it seems that most of you believe that you're doing well in allowing your volunteers to create impact while enjoying that experience. But in terms of the things that you need to improve on the most, I think most people answered connectedness. That's the most popular answer. Connectedness to the cause as something that can be improved on. And interestingly enough, impact is also the second most common answer here. So I think maybe for organizations that have, excelled elsewhere, they still believe that creating experiences that maximize the impact that volunteers are creating is still very important. So these are good. Thank you for answering, by the way. And I think these are good starting points for us to learn about ourselves and, of course, anchor the discussions today. So now I think many of you might be interested to learn more about what are these dimensions, what exactly are we talking about here, and what are important things that we need to know about understanding how we can transform the volunteer experience, right? So I think to do that, it will be important for us to understand the research and know what does this research tell us about how we can transform that experience. If we go to the next slide, so today we have Ken Soon, Senior Manager from NCSS, to tell us more about the importance of this topic and give us a summary of the study entitled Transforming the Volunteer Experience. So Ken, the floor is yours.
Oh. What? Hello, testing. Oh dear. Oh no.
Oh, Ken, we can hear you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. I just got a
Okay.
pop-up that my Zoom crashed, and I was like, okay, so that didn't happen. Very happy. Okay. Thank you once again, Andrew. I'm Ken, and it's really my pleasure to share about this research study that NCSS has done in collaboration with SMU Lien Centre for Social Innovation. But before I go into this study, I would just like to share this quote by DPM Lawrence Wong, who spoke at the Singapore Volunteer Management Conference 2023. So as you can read, if you've seen in the survey done by MVPC, I think more than 50% of Singaporeans have the desire to volunteer. But as you will know, volunteerism rate has hovered around 20 to 30% for the past few years. And in reality, many people do not really step up to volunteer. Some may say they have not found the right organization or the opportunity that appeal to them. Some, many say do not have time. A few say, they actually find that when they volunteer, the experience falls short of their expectation. They may not be well supported. They find it difficult to volunteer, or they do not see that they are really making an impact. So in a way, they may not continue to volunteer. So all these are lost opportunities that actually we may not have realized. Lost opportunities that we could have tapped into to really improve the lives of our service user, as well as to in turn build a more caring society through volunteerism. Lost opportunity that we could have had if volunteer had been given a better experience. However, what is a quality volunteering experience? And after knowing what is a quality volunteer experience, what can SSA do to get there? Oh, sorry. Andrew, can I check whether you can see my screen?
Your screen is showing, but if you move to a different slide, it's not moving.
Oh, okay. Let me reshare again. Do let me know if you are seeing this code that I was talking about. Yes?
No, not yet. We still see
okay.
the title
Let me
slide.
see. I will stop share. Sorry, we actually did technical check, but seems not. How about now? Okay.
Yes. Okay.
Okay. Sorry, Ram, for the technical glitch. I hope it really works this time. Okay. Yeah. So, I was talking about really what was the premise for us to start this collaboration with SMU Lien Centre for Social Innovation, which is doing this research study to really find out what is a quality volunteering experience, and how can SSAs as well as other charities do to really get to really enhance your volunteer experience. So this study is titled Transforming the Volunteer Experience in the Social Service Sector. And at the bottom, you will see that actually we have surveyed 180 volunteers from across 112 social service agency SSAs, as well as the qualitative interviews with 10 volunteer managers to try to reinforce any findings that we have from the quantitative survey. To cover our question, we have also explored various key themes like volunteer participation, experience, the impact of volunteering on volunteers, as well as volunteering retention. I won't go into the details of all our questions and analyses. You can refer to the report itself. I think my colleagues will be sharing in our chat as well as in today's deck. But just to share, one of the key pieces of this research study is this. All the analysis and findings, whether it's about the motivation or perceived benefits by volunteers, all point to these 5 key features of what is a quality volunteering experience for volunteers. And we hope that this insight will enable you to evaluate whether these features exist in your current volunteering opportunity, and if not, whether you would like to see how to incorporate or add them. And importantly, communicating this appropriately to volunteers during recruitment and selection, and later on during and as well as after the volunteering process. So in terms of these 5 features, I will first talk about impact. So I think all of us, not only our volunteers, when it comes to volunteering or even doing anything in life, we have that inner ambition that we want to impact lives. So I think it's very important that to highlight the progress that volunteers are making with their service users. When volunteers are able to see the value that they create and feel appreciated for their contribution, they can be reminded of why they chose to volunteer and feel motivated to continue the good work they do. And recognizing them for their contribution is also an effective strategy to enhance the experience. And you can do so by recognizing them in the presence of others, whether it's their families, their friends, their colleagues, their supervisors, etc., etc. And next, on exposure. So according to our survey's result, actually volunteers said that they have gained more life experience and exposures to things that they might not otherwise have encountered in their life. So about 60% of respondents felt their life experience broadened. More than half indicated that volunteering bring them into contact with people from different backgrounds. The idea here is really to create that big family environment. And once you have that, volunteers will stay longer due to the bonds they have built, the friendship they have built. Next, on enjoyment. So I'm glad to see that many of you have actually these features in just now the statistics have shown that you actually look into making sure that volunteering is enjoyable. I'm very happy because actually the top key benefit that volunteers said in this study is really that they enjoy volunteering. So many enjoyment could come in many forms. So many of the SSAs have actually invest in their volunteers by providing good training to make sure that at least the volunteers are assured of carrying out their duties smoothly and effectively. The other SSAs have created a positive environment where volunteers may feel fulfillment and growth in their journey. And of course, and later on, I think one of the speaker, Natalie from Cushman and Wakefield, will also share how they, as a corporate, have also made volunteering enjoyable by gamifying the experience a little bit. Next, on connectedness, I saw that I think connectedness was not very high on in terms of what the audience have been doing. I would presume that the most connected person in most agency would be probably the founder, and he's probably the most committed to the cause. So actually, how do you replicate this to your volunteers? So clearly communicating your mission and vision to your volunteers so that volunteers know exactly what they are getting themselves involved. And from time to time, also tell them more about what your cause is about. For example, if your cause is about tackling, helping service users, perhaps with mental health condition, tell them about the condition itself. Explain about depression, explain to them about schizophrenia, get them to know more, as well as also telling them the dreams and goals for what you want for the service user, what you want for the situation in mental health, so that really the volunteers themselves can really feel even more connected to your cause and form that strong relation of collaboration with your agency. And last but not least, I think is flexibility. I think the most passionate volunteers will also face barriers, to volunteering if programs do not really accommodate to their lifestyle needs to some extent. So I think many of our SSA would try to do this, for example, by catering volunteering on perhaps weekend or after work for those who are working with, then choosing to work with schools, perhaps to get students to work during school time. And many of our corporates as well have also incorporated maybe a day leave or in a year for volunteering and so. But more than that, also look into your volunteers in terms of certain life transition. Your volunteers could be actually getting married, starting a new family, changing a new job, or doing a new study or something. So look into these life stages of your volunteers and see whether you can still maintain some flexibility to keep your volunteers engaged. I think in turn, the volunteer will really feel valued, that you have really seen how to work with them to make sure that they continue their volunteering journey. Next. So from the study itself, we have also done a deeper analysis using volunteering profiling. Okay, to explain this, so volunteering profiling helped the to try to see whether there are specific profiles of volunteers and whether those profiles influence the experience, whether they will retain longer, and whether they will influence their preferences. So these findings from the volunteer profile will help you to design and implement more precise strategy for your volunteer program. So in the report itself, you will loosely see these three groups in terms of volunteering roles, the type of volunteering that they do, their motivation, and their perceived benefits. So I won't go into the details of these volunteering roles, but in terms of some examples would be, for example, in support roles, they could be like delivering necessity or providing some transport or driving. Then in terms of motivation, they could be motivated by their career development or certain beliefs, and whether they have some perceived benefit in terms of maybe they see that volunteering help in their mental well-being or physical health, or it helps in making new friends through social. So I'll just give you one example of how you can use volunteer profiling from this study to help your work. So on the screen now, on the left side, you will see this chart, benefits of volunteering. You'll see many of these charts in the study itself. It's mainly an aggregated finding of volunteers on certain topics. So for example, on the left, you will see now, you'll see that the perceived benefit of volunteering by aggregated is that volunteers enjoy volunteering. They also see the benefit of volunteering in terms of broadening their life experience, and as well as making a life difference, and so on and so forth. Then on the right side, you will also then see many of these charts where it's broken down further into the specific profiles. And in this case, volunteering role. So in charts like this, you will see some of these green, highlighted in green ticks. Those are statistically significant findings, where it simply means that, when we studied the data, these are not caused by chance. So in other words, when volunteers volunteer in support role, they tend to say that they enjoy volunteering. They tend to say that they feel that it's making a difference. So I'll use one example in terms of the one that I've circled here in red, organizational-based volunteering role, where you can see at the bottom, it could mean providing training support, providing a professional skill, or fundraising for the organization. So when volunteers are doing this kind of role, you can consider to make sure that these benefits are perceived by your volunteers enjoyable. They are really making a difference, as well as there's opportunities for them to broaden their life experience, whether it's knowing more people from different backgrounds or knowing other things that they may not know from their other lives, their other experience in life. So I hope this study will have many interesting findings for you to see how you can really benefit your work. So at the end of the study itself, we have also two key recommendations. So the first one is really about, as I've said so many times in this sharing, is really to know your volunteer. Invest in strategies that can really let you to understand your volunteers. And when I say this, I actually also do not mean that you need to reinvent the wheel. Actually, some of this data may already be available in your, for example, volunteer application form or existing surveys. So it's just about how to use them. For example, you may already know your volunteer life stage. You may already know their roles, okay? And and if not, you can then see whether you want to add additional questions to surveys that you can use to find out. For example, maybe you have not found out why your volunteers are motivated to volunteer in the first place. That can be a key question for you to find out, and then from there, use those findings. So the next key recommendation is then use those valuable volunteer knowledge to drive a more volunteer-centered approach. I think this is where it's very important to say that volunteers can then take on a more strategic and complementary roles along staff. When volunteers can then see that, hey, I'm able to, I know my volunteers would like to, take on more leadership role, then I can plan to see how to develop them further. So I hope that my sharing has been able to give you some idea on how to really create a better volunteering experience. And later on, the speakers itself will also share many of their good experience in their own organization. Last but not least, I will leave you with this quote from actually Minister Mastagos during the launch of the research study. So good volunteer management can really have an enormous impact on the work that we do. It can enable us to scale up our programs, sustain our effort, and serve many, many more service users and beneficiaries. But we really need to make sure that we match volunteers and their skills and the needs to ensure that it's really a meaningful one and harness their energy effectively. With that, I hope you will really check out the research study and hope that you can also do more to understand your volunteers. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Ken, for sharing. I'm honestly a big fan of having, complex topics like this distilled into key features or dimensions. I think it really helps organizations to have like a consistent frame of reference, something that you can always go back to and check, if I want to improve the volunteer experience, if I want to start talking to my volunteers, how do I map that back to those dimensions, and how do I make sure that I tackle each of those dimensions as I try to transform the volunteer experience? So thank you. Good stuff. Now, I think it's good for us to now see this applied in action. So our first speaker will be Lynette Kang, Assistant Director at the National Library Board. So she has been with NLB for many years across multiple roles, such as social media, developing, setting up new libraries, even managing some of the public libraries like the ones in Orchard and Esplanade, and has moved into the volunteer management space last year. She's particularly interested in designing and facilitating community building activities and is a volunteer herself. So she volunteers at the Jalan Senang Community Garden, where they experiment with growing edibles using regenerative farming, and with Checkmates, an initiative to address scams and misinformation. So without further ado, I'll hand the screen over to Lynette.
Hi, can you see my screen?
Yes, all good, Lynette.
Okay, hi. My name is Lynette, and I'm from the volunteer management team at the National Library Board of Singapore. Thank you so much for sharing your time with me today. Today, I'm going to share about how we built our volunteer community at the Punggol Regional Library, which is actually our newest public library. I'll start with some background on how NLB thinks about volunteer experience and also how it supports our organizational volunteer strategy. And I'll also talk about how the volunteer experience was implemented in our this new library. Oh, I'm so sorry. It's not moving. Oh, okay. So first off, let me give you some background on our organization. The National Library Board, or NLB, is unique as we have 3 institutions under our umbrella. We have our 28 public libraries across the island, which offer a range of content, reading programs, and learning experiences for the community. We also have the National Library, which focuses on preserving Singapore's print heritage and intellectual memory. And lastly, the National Archives is responsible for the collection, preservation, and management of Singapore's archival records. NLB's volunteers serve in diverse roles across these 3 institutions in a total of 31 different locations. So about the roles, in our public libraries, volunteers support library operations, programs, services, and assist at a range of events. At the National Library, volunteers contribute in more niche areas related to history and heritage. For instance, the things you see on the screen are actually volunteers who are helping to sort out, translate, and organize heritage material that was donated to the library. And in our archives, we have volunteer gallery guides, as well as volunteers who help with the transcription of handwritten archival records. All in all, NLB has about 4,000 unique active volunteers every year. And of these, about 30% meet the NCSS definition of regular volunteerism, which is at least 4 volunteering sessions a year. However, our most regular volunteers are extremely committed, and we see around 1,000 volunteering hours per year from some of them. So let me start by sharing a bit more about the context of how we operate behind the scenes, which I hope give you guys some insights into how NLB thinks about volunteer experience and also why it matters to us. So firstly, NLB adopts what we call decentralized approach to volunteer management, because quite simply, our volunteers are scattered all around the organization. We have a central volunteer management team, which I am part of, which sits in HQ and oversees sort of organizational-wide functions such as our strategy, our policy, publicity, and our online touchpoints, which are not site-specific. At the same time, we have 50, more or less, volunteer management officers on the ground, who interface with volunteers on a day-to-day basis and do things like training, day-to-day engagement, onboarding of new volunteers. Actually, this means that for NLB, the volunteer experience is a collaborative effort that involves multiple stakeholders working together. The second aspect is that we have an online experience, which is quite a crucial component in our volunteer journey. So NLB has an online volunteer management portal, which is a key touch point that all volunteers will encounter regardless of the role they are volunteering in. The design of the portal plays a major factor in how easily volunteers can search for information, sign up for opportunities, and get their queries addressed. All these are important components of a volunteering experience that is above and beyond the time that they spend actually volunteering. Lastly, we think of the volunteer experience as a sort of a multifaceted user journey across a series of touch points. And it's not just about the actual volunteer role itself. So this perspective may be a little bit unique for NLB because most, if not all, of our volunteers are also users of our services. And this means that for every NLB touchpoint, even the ones that are not related to volunteering, are actually potential opportunities for us to inspire new volunteers to join us. And at the same time, we hope that volunteering will encourage our volunteers to also explore other NLB services. And so, this is my final background slide before I zoom into the actual case study. NLB's volunteer strategy is summarized on what we call our North Star, which you can see on the screen. I won't read it out, but basically it spells out our vision for how we see the organization working effectively with volunteers towards mutually beneficial outcomes. There's a lot to unpack, which I won't really go into detail, but I would like to highlight 3 ways in which the volunteer experience helps us to drive this strategy. So firstly, we want NLB to be well known as a preferred volunteering destination, and offering a positive volunteer experience helps to support this by demonstrating that we as an organization value our volunteers and their experiences. Volunteering roles should also be thoughtfully designed to meet organizational needs while also being meaningful and enjoyable for our volunteers. These are in fact mutually reinforcing goals, as volunteers are generally more satisfied when they feel that their work is valued and impactful, which is a point that was also brought up earlier in the study. Lastly, the volunteer experience needs to be delivered in a sustainable way that considers the operational realities for the organization. For instance, there could be resourcing or skills limitations that need to be considered. Also, when faced with finite resources, it's important to be clear about the aspects of the experience that matter most to your volunteers, and so that we can focus our energies and efforts on addressing these areas as a priority. We had the opportunity to put these strategies into practice earlier this year when we opened the Pongo Regional Library, which is our newest library and our 4th regional library. So Pongo Regional Library, or we call it PRL, is a 5-story library located in the One Pongo Community Centre. It's one of our largest libraries, and it's also the first to be designed inclusively with a range of features and services to welcome patrons with disabilities. The library soft opened 2 of its 5 floors in January this year and was fully opened in March. The volunteer management team, my team, was fortunate enough to be involved fairly early in the planning process, which meant that we could work with our internal stakeholders to plan for services to be delivered or enhanced with the support of volunteers. And also we could work with them to review library operations so that we could build in volunteer management and engagement duties for staff as part of the basic ops. The rest of the slides are going to focus on sort of the range of new things that we tried across different touch points to improve the volunteer experience for this particular library. So we'll start with the first component, which is recruitment, which is the point at which a volunteer signs up to volunteer with NLB. At this point, I'll point out that we have not yet started volunteering. And traditionally, for NLB, all prospective or new volunteers are directed to sign up on our online portal as a first step. However, the challenge is that the portal can be difficult to use for new users, especially those who are less savvy or others who may be unfamiliar with the interface or the terms that we use. The registration process alone can be quite lengthy, requiring volunteers to fill in more than 20 painful mandatory fields. This, not surprisingly, might discourage prospective volunteers from signing up. So to recruit more effectively for our new library, we needed to improve the online experience for new volunteers. And we did so by reducing the friction for these volunteers to take the first step and make it as easy as possible for them to act on their interest in volunteering before they change their minds. So in our recruitment campaign for Pongo, we did not direct our new volunteers to the portal immediately. Instead, we got them to fill in a simple online form with just 4 fields, which would enable them to sign up for an in-person introductory briefing session. Introductory briefing sessions were a new touch point that we had introduced in order to create a more positive first encounter with NLB. With these sessions, volunteers no longer began their experience with us by navigating a complex and confusing online portal on their own. Instead, they were invited as a first step to a nice, happy platform where staff could personally meet them, welcome them to the library, share information about the roles available, and address volunteer queries on the spot. We find that volunteers feel more well supported as they receive personal attention, and they also get a chance to meet and speak with other like-minded volunteers. For Pongo, we brought on board close to 200 new volunteers through these sessions, and we found them quite successful, so we've since adopted these as an essential step in most of our other recruitment campaigns. The next step, what we call conversion, is what we refer to when registered volunteers actually start volunteering for the first time and they are converted to what we call active NLB volunteers. So the design and experience of the actual volunteering role is quite central to the volunteering experience. However, NLB faced challenges in this regard coming out of COVID, as we had far fewer programs and initiatives and events than before. This also meant that we had a reduction in the number and variety of volunteering roles available. The opportunities on offer were mainly to support day-to-day library operations, and while these had their fair share of regulars, they also tended to be repetitive and might not offer much in the way of flexibility or room for growth. While our long-time regulars were happy to continue serving in these roles, we were concerned that newer volunteers might be disinterested and disengaged after not much time. So fortunately, Pongo Regional Library opened with an extensive suite of new services that required volunteer support, and we were able to design and put out a number of new roles, which you'll see on the screen. So firstly, we have volunteer library guides who offer tours of the library's facilities and services to help make the library a welcoming place for all. We also have user education volunteers who are on site to help patrons with using NLB services such as our borrowing stations or our NLB mobile app. Volunteers at Pongo Regional Library could also facilitate sessions at Spark Lab that you see in the corner, which is a tinkering space for children. Volunteers could help with shelving and arranging our collection at the library's volunteer-run space. And they could also do back-end support work, such as crafting and putting together materials for our programs. Offering a wider variety of roles helped us to reach out to volunteers with different interests. Volunteers had more choice and flexibility to plan their own volunteering journeys. And overall, we could offer a better experience for volunteers regardless of what they wanted to do. We observed that many volunteers enjoyed being trained in and trying out different roles. Some would come in and spend a day volunteering in one role after another because they wanted to maximize the time that they had spent traveling down to the library. Others took great pride in being able to say that they were able to perform all the roles available. However, it was not sufficient to simply have many roles. At Pongo, we experienced firsthand the importance of actively reviewing and redesigning our roles to meet evolving community needs, while also sustaining volunteer engagement. So allow me to share an example relating to the library guide role that I mentioned earlier. When the library first opened, there was great interest from the public to attend these volunteer-led tours, as there were many curious first-time visitors who wanted to tour around the library. However, demand died down after the first few months, and the number of participants fell as more users became familiar with the library. This was discouraging for our volunteers, of course, but also indicated to us that the service was perhaps no longer needed at this point. However, we did want to retain and continue working with our pool of volunteer guides who had already invested so much time and effort in their training. And we were able to do so by redesigning the guiding role to focus on a different set of content. In place of general tours, guides were redeployed to offer tours of what we call Pongo Stories, which are a series of installations across the library showcasing Pongo's literary and cultural heritage. This appealed to our volunteers because many of them were also Pongo residents with stories to share of their own. Through this role redesign, volunteers could continue putting their newfound guiding skills to good use, and they also stayed engaged throughout by learning new content. We're actually right now looking forward to their inaugural tour, which is going to happen next month. So this brings us to our next component on volunteer engagement. And I'm sure no one in this virtual room will dispute the importance of engagement. But at the same time, realities such as limited bandwidth, conflicting priorities mean that it might not be always easy to offer an ideal level of engagement, even with the best of intentions and as much as we would like to do so. Hence, sustainability was an important consideration when we were planning for volunteers for this library. We felt strongly that volunteer engagement should be driven not only by the staff, its mission, and the organization, but also through connections with their fellow volunteers who were volunteering for similar causes as them. To make this happen, we needed to deliberately create a space where volunteer-to-volunteer connections could take place. In PRL, we started by literally setting aside space in the form of a dedicated volunteer lounge, which only volunteers and staff could access. This is a dedicated space where volunteers could rest in between performing their roles and catch up with one another. To encourage lingering, we kept the lounge well stocked with snacks and drinks, and I'm happy to report that we did observe volunteers having tea together before and after their volunteering sessions. Aside from these literal spaces, most volunteering experiences, including training and networking sessions, can be tweaked to facilitate more volunteers connecting with one another. During training sessions, we buffer in comfortable amounts of time for tea breaks in between the hard work and encourage volunteers to make new friends or say hi to someone new. Once again, being generous with plenty of snacks helps to break the ice and also nudge conversations along. On regular days when there is a lot less snacking and a lot more hard work, we try to have volunteers support one another in their roles by just being there for one another. So for instance, volunteering for the first time can be intimidating. And when doing our scheduling, we try as far as possible to pair up first-timers with more experienced volunteers who can help to guide them along. In this way, staff are assured that new volunteers are well taken care of, even if the staff cannot personally be there with them all the time. And I'm now at my fourth and final component, which is volunteer acknowledgement. I think most organizations would have formal appreciation events held 1 or 2 times a year, and NLB is no different. However, outside of these events, it is equally important that volunteers feel seen and valued as they go about performing their roles day to day. NLB tries to do this by using visual markers in the library to acknowledge the role of volunteers and celebrate their presence in their role in providing services to the public. So on the screen, there are a few examples of how several public libraries proudly announce the presence of the volunteers and their contributions to the space. It has a side effect of also letting the public know that they can volunteer with us. Furthermore, volunteers are also given their own attire, which gives them a sense of identity and ownership, and also marks them as a member of the library community. Acknowledgement can also take the form of exclusive volunteer experiences that can at the same time serve organizational needs. So I'm very fond of sharing this example, which NLB has which is a long-standing tradition in NLB. We have a habit of tapping on our regular volunteers as talents to support photo shoots, filming, and online publicity every time we launch a new service or open a new library. This is a nice way of celebrating and acknowledging a group of users who are already invested in the library's success, and including them once again in a sense of community. The volunteers themselves are usually very excited and very happy to be selected, and they enjoy the experience of getting their hair done, their makeup done, and posing for the camera and getting their photographs taken. So what's on screen is a small selection of media assets for the launch of Pongo Regional Library, all of which feature our volunteers. A final example of acknowledgement is quite simply signaling that the views and opinions of our volunteers are valued. At Pongo Regional Library, we hosted a series of volunteer engagement sessions that were specifically targeted at engaging with our regular volunteers. During these sessions, we sought and incorporated feedback to improve both the volunteer and patrons' experiences at our libraries. We learned that volunteers appreciated having a platform where they could be heard, even though most had only positive things to say about their experience, which you can see from the word cloud on the screen, which is, I guarantee you, contributions from the volunteers themselves at the session. And with this, I've sort of come to the last page of my presentation, and I'll just close with some final thoughts on, I think, my take on the volunteering experience. So firstly, I think it's important to reflect about the components or touch points that can impact the experience of your volunteers beyond the actual experience of doing the volunteering role. The volunteer life cycle is actually a useful frame to adopt, and it was useful for me as a kind of new volunteer manager. Secondly, while volunteer retention is sort of the holy grail for all of us, dropouts are unavoidable, often for reasons beyond our control. And in fact, most of you in the pre-event survey did point out that attracting and retaining volunteers were of equal importance to your organization. So in this vein, it's worth considering how the volunteer experience can also support growth and outreach to new volunteers. Thirdly, flexibility, which is another important component, can be achieved by designing the experience to offer volunteers more choice to build in the kind of level of flexibility that they desire. I think NLB is fortunate that we have so many locations and so many different services because it gives us the scope to offer more options to our volunteers. And finally, it's equally important to get the buy-in and support of our internal stakeholders who are essential co-partners in delivering a positive volunteer experience to our stakeholders. That's actually the end of my presentation. I did not overrun. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lynette. Yes, you didn't overrun. And, as you rightly pointed out, looking at this, the volunteer journey, looking at the different touch points, I think is a really good takeaway. It's a very structured way to look at how volunteers participate in your organizations. And you even highlighted pain points across each of those touch points. So I think it's a great way to, again, be very meticulous and structured about assessing how you can improve that experience. And of course, tying it back to how do you make people feel valued? How do you make people enjoy what they do? Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Right. So our next yeah. Okay, so our next speaker is going to be Shikin Ahmad from she is a volunteer manager at Dementia Singapore. Shikin is very enthusiastic about fostering vibrant, trusted, and lasting volunteer partnerships. So in her current role, she finds joy when volunteers engage and contribute meaningfully to the dementia community and creating greater awareness of dementia through advocacy and public education. She's also very passionate about creating an inclusive society and will incessantly advocate what we call a human-centered approach and experience. So, seeing things from the lens of the people that you serve. Shikin, it's great to have you today. Over to you.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you everyone for giving me this space to talk about the volunteering experience at Dementia Singapore. So at Dementia Singapore, I am from the volunteer management team. There are 3 of us in the team. So how we go about volunteer management, how we go about VMing is largely inspired by our volunteer management vision. So how we create experiences and journeys with our different volunteers is influenced by our vision. Our vision was crafted back in 2019. So it was in collaboration with NCSS, a consultant. I can't remember the name of the consultant, and a few key members of our staff. We wanted to have a North Star, like Lynette has a North Star, of how should we go about managing our volunteers. So this was what we came up with back in 2019. We seek to inspire volunteers through a vibrant and trusted partnership to build a dementia-inclusive society. I'm just going to pick a few words from our vision. You see on this screen. Inspiring our volunteers, that is something very pivotal and very important to us. Vibrant, trustworthy partnership, signifying long-term, and also keeping close and connected to our vision, which is essentially to make Singapore a dementia-inclusive society. So our vision guides our approach, our volunteer management approach, through 3 ways. How we communicate with our volunteers, online, digitally, in our email communication, when we text with our volunteers, as well as offline when we meet our volunteers, that our vision kind of guides our brand persona and also our brand identity. how we create a meaningful exchange, because it is about a partnership. It is not just about our volunteers giving, but it's also about our volunteers receiving. And also how we always keep closely connected to the dementia cause. We want Singapore to be a dementia inclusive society. So there are 3 of us, and this is our VM approach. So we co-create journeys and experiences with our volunteers. Okay, so volunteers, there are many different groups, different types of volunteers. At Dementia with Singapore, to tailor the experience, we created 3 fits of volunteers. So we have our individual volunteers, who are volunteers like you and I. We have different intentions, different goals to volunteering, and we come from all walks of life and across different age groups. Our second fit of volunteer, we have our student and our youth volunteers. So generally, our student and youth volunteers, they serve values in action, VIA or service learning projects. And last but not least, we have our corporate volunteers. So volunteers from different organizations coming in small groups, in big teams, to support us across different roles. So support role with no interaction with our service user, or at Dementia Singapore, we call our service users our clients. In user role, with direct interaction or supporting our organization. So these 3 different fit of volunteers, a dedicated VM practitioner journey with each group of volunteers. So if you're an individual volunteer at Dementia Singapore, you have one go-to person to journey with you throughout. And if you're a student or a youth volunteer, I have a team member who is a youth himself, leading volunteer management for this group of volunteers. And myself, I journey with a lot of our corporate volunteers across a roadmap of CSR initiatives that include learning, engagement, and support. So why do we do this? Why do we do it the way we do? We also believe that as volunteers give, we also want our volunteers to receive in a meaningful exchange. So I borrow a quote from Christy Kruger, a marketing guru. Really, when it comes down to a volunteer experience, it is also our opportunity to touch the lives of our volunteers. So let's have a look at our individual volunteers. So our individual volunteers, as you see on screen, they come from different age groups with different intentions and different goals. And the role of the VM practitioner who is journeying with our individual volunteers, in addition to uncovering the intention and motivation, also to identify the jobs to be done or volunteering for that particular volunteer. For convenience, I will use myself as an example. My intention of volunteering with Dementia Singapore, it could be I want to engage persons living with dementia. That's my intention. And my motivation is my personal experience with dementia. I have a family member who is a person living with dementia. So 2 aspects of it. But what does volunteering do for me? I have my intention, I have my motivation. What are the jobs to be done of volunteering for me? Looking at it from different lenses. So when I volunteer, it could be I want to be in a setting, I want to be in a social setting. I want to be in a dementia care setting where I am connected or I am exposed to fellow care partners. Yeah, so uncovering the jobs to be done is the role of the VMP who's journeying with individual volunteers, because when we do that, it allows us to meet volunteers where they're at in comparison to having volunteers, recruiting volunteers, going through the whole trajectory of volunteer training, and thereafter just having our volunteers in our database. And as and when we require the support of our volunteers, we call on our volunteers. So essentially putting the volunteer at the core of the journey. So with our volunteers, we try to create opportunities for exposure as well, exposure to other volunteers, getting to know each other. In every gathering, every training session, there will always be the usual icebreaker to just keep the energy up. And thereafter, we will always allow a space for our volunteers to share with each other their volunteering experience. If they are comfortable navigating large group communication, they can share to the entire group. If they feel that maybe they just want to chit-chat, make it informal, we intentionally create the space for that, because we also want cross-pollination of ideas and exchanges. And to support our volunteers, these individual volunteers, they serve across different roles and different volunteer programs. We support them with training in areas that are related to their role. So if they are engaging persons living with dementia at our care center, we make sure that you are supported with dementia knowledge, dementia information, also how to communicate and how to engage with persons living with dementia. And if they take on another role, we will always try to support with complementary training. So we do have volunteers who have been supporting us at our care centers, and then they feel that, hey, I want to represent Dementia Singapore in outreach. So to support them in performing their new role, we also provide a baseline training. Okay, when you do outreach, what is the persona you bring, how should you engage audience and outreach activities. So training for volunteers, and always, of course, highlighting and over communicating the impact of our volunteers' contribution. Yeah, this is something that we intentionally do when we communicate via email, when we see our volunteers in person, even in gatherings. When we have a volunteer gathering, we will have key leaders coming to join us. You see on screen, we have our Director of Advocacy and Communication sitting in our volunteer briefing and engaging with our volunteers. At events, we do have our CEO coming to talk to our volunteers, to thank our volunteers for their contribution. So with our individual volunteers, we find that a lot of them are very connected and inspired to take on more than just one role. So it could be the inspiration by connecting with fellow volunteers, or it could also be inspiration through connectedness with the organization. Our youth volunteers, our student and youth volunteers, we have a lot of student volunteers who continue their journey beyond their VIA and service learning projects. So this is insight from my team member, who is a youth himself, leading volunteer management for student and youth volunteers. He brought to my awareness that as VMP, we need to try and see the volunteering experience, or try to empathize and feel the volunteering experience from the lens of a youth. So essentially validating a youth's experience, acknowledging, affirming, and offering adequate support. I was always under the assumption that, for youths to engage with seniors, okay, it is something that is very comfortable. It's like engaging with your grandparents. But from my team members inside, this may not be so. Some youths, especially young person, it may be very daunting for them to engage with someone who's so much older. And having him journey with this group of volunteers makes them feel supported and comforted along the journey. So with youths, we also try to facilitate learning. We will provide training, sharing about dementia knowledge, dementia information, and very importantly for young people is to allow that creative space for them to translate that knowledge into action. So with this space, and with someone journeying with you, understanding where you're coming from, how you feel, our youth volunteers have keep on coming back to offer support across different roles. You see on screen here, we have Project Rikodare from Hwa Chong Institution. So they were volunteering with us for quite a while, initially starting off as facilitating activities with our persons living with dementia. And as they go along the journey, they took on other roles, and they finished off their volunteering for that period of time with a fundraiser where they created merch to sell and raise funds for Dementia Singapore. So Project Rikodare, the team members, they're still quite active today, coming back to support as and when time permits. So for student volunteers, having that VMP who is able to see, or who tries to see things from the lens of a youth, being able to empathize and validate a youth's experience, allows that continuity of journey just beyond the VIA and beyond service learning. Now, corporate volunteers, I personally journey with a lot of our corporate volunteers. It is about creating a roadmap of opportunities that include learning, engagement, which may open up to other areas of support. So with corporate volunteers, we try to see and facilitate a meaningful exchange from learning. We are very intensive. We are very intentional and intensive in sharing our dementia-related knowledge. So this can look like before a session, having a volunteer briefing, volunteer training. So a volunteer briefing minimally is 45 minutes. So in that 45 minutes, we will share knowledge about dementia. We share knowledge about dementia. We will share tips about how do you communicate and engage with persons living with dementia. Having that safety briefing, having this briefing is important for volunteers to feel supported as they engage with persons living with dementia. So learning can also look like us going to our corporate volunteers organizations to deliver lunch and learn talks. So all these activities, it will be planned in a yearly roadmap where it could start off with a lunch and learn session, and then a few engagement sessions, and thereafter we could have another lunch and learn session. So essentially, we try to create a meaningful exchange from learning to doing that may result in giving. So you see on screen here, I have Elston. Elston is from one of our regular and key corporate volunteers, HUP. So I first met Elston when I delivered the lunch and learn talk back in July 2022, last year. Yeah, so back then I had a conversation with him. I shared this with his permission, and he shared that after the lunch and learn session, it made me it made him think about his late grandma, who was a person living with dementia, and that impacted him. And throughout the roadmap of activities, I regularly see Elston at our different engagements. And Elston also, as you see from the quote here, he tries to get more volunteers from Hilti to come and support all the engagement activities. So with corporates, this is how we try to do it. It's not just we try not to have it just one engagement or one-time session, but we try to think of a roadmap where it can be mutually beneficial. Also for corporates, we try to create opportunities for exposure across different volunteering roles. So you have the service roles where you engage with clients, persons living with dementia. And then you have roles such as you offer maybe your skill support. So this is the very made to measure approach at Dementia Singapore, where there is a need, and then we will go and I will go and locate the resource within the corporate organization, and then also event support. We recently staged a fundraising concert at our Tampines Hub featuring Michael Learns to Rock. For that event, we needed 70 volunteers. 70 volunteers to support across various roles just to execute the concert. So we needed 70 extra manpower to support in ushering, wayfinding, safety patrol, basically just to ensure that the event is a success. So when I heard I needed 70 volunteers, and I believe I got the information just a couple of weeks before the event. So I thought, okay, who can I go to for support? Who can I go to get these 70 volunteers? So because of this relationship that I have with a few corporate partners, Salesforce, Netflix, just to name a few, I could just pick up the phone like, hello, can help with a few with manpower support. And for corporates, it is something that's very valuable for them because it allows them to participate in a different role. Just going there, going to the concert, helping out with ushering, wayfinding, and thereafter enjoying Michael Learns to Rock, the concert itself. So after the whole session, we did a debrief and they shared that it is really quite a positive experience. And some volunteers shared that, it was beneficial that they also get to engage with our colleagues from different departments. So it gets a more holistic view of how we do things at Dementia Singapore. So with corporates, about the journey, the roadmap of learning, engagements, and support, and always about constant education and re-education to align us and to keep us connected to the cause. So even for the concert, before they actually volunteer, I will share that, okay, why are we doing this concert? We're doing this concert because we are raising awareness of dementia in the heartlands. So always remind them of why we do what we do, and also to thank them for their support. So after the whole concert, I thank my volunteers because I told them, I said, without all of them, we will not be able to run the concert because otherwise we cannot afford 70 manpower, 70 additional manpower. So creating this journey with our corporate volunteers, creating a roadmap of giving and receiving, the outcome of it is really having sustainable and long-term volunteer partnerships. So this is something that may evolve and also offer different types of support for Dementia Singapore down the road. So I will close off my sharing by circling back to our vision, which really influences and inspires the way we do volunteer management, how we create volunteering experiences at Dementia Singapore. We really want to inspire our volunteers first and foremost through a vibrant and trustworthy partnership. And together with our volunteers, we will inch closer towards our vision of creating a dementia-inclusive society. So on this screen, you see two hashtags. We regularly use these two hashtags to share about volunteering experiences. All our different volunteers, when they come and contribute, when they spend time with us, we try to talk about them using these two hashtags. Okay, back to you, Andrew.
Okay, thank you, Shikin. That was great sharing. I really like that when we introduced you, we talked about the human-centered approach, putting yourself in the lens, or putting on the lens of the people that you serve. You've extended that, so you not only think about, as you call them, your clients, but you also think about your volunteers. And having these dedicated approaches to different groups of volunteers makes it easier to put on that lens. So I think, thank you for sharing all of that, and that was very good.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so at this point, we are actually going to go into a short 5-minute break. Maybe some of you need a coffee, need to stretch a bit, go to the toilet. And also we are showing on screen the QR code for the Q&A on Mentimeter. The link has also been in the chat. We've been posting it from time to time, but for those who have not seen the QR code or have not seen the link, You can scan that. That will bring you to our Q&A tool, so you can type in your questions, or you can view the existing questions and then upvote those that resonate the most with you. So this allows us to prioritize the questions later during the Q&A session with the rest of the panel. Okay, so I think with that, right now it's 3:36. We can be back by 3:41, 3:42. Right? Thank you, everyone, and we'll be right back. Okay, everyone, welcome back from the short break. I hope everyone was able to recharge a little bit, and hopefully you're now ready to go for the second half of today's session. So for our volunteer management network sessions, we really like getting the participants involved. And for today's activity, we would like you to put yourselves in the shoes of a volunteer. So for our interactive activity today, similar to what Shikin talked about, where we have different volunteer managers tackling different groups of volunteers, let's try to practice that muscle, that way of thinking. If you were to volunteer yourself, think about what you would be valuing in your volunteer experience, right? So again, this is um, letting you focus on yourself as a volunteer, not necessarily what your volunteers in your organizations are doing. And for this, we will be using a separate instance of Mentimeter. So this is going to be different from the Q&A code and link, just so that we don't confuse the two. We will be collecting your responses to some questions. So now we have the slides, and we already have some people already keying in their answers. Thank you very much for being proactive. Scan the QR code and start entering your responses. So again, the first question is, if you imagine that you are a volunteer, what do you want to get from this experience? You can use some of the words that we have been discussing today, or you can think of other things that really matter to you. Again, this is, putting yourself in the shoes of the volunteer. Uh, just think about what causes you might be passionate about, how you might want to volunteer. And for this to work for you, for this to be something that you do, regularly, what does that need to be? So I'm seeing some words here. I think impact seems to be staying at the center of this word cloud. The word cloud is um, very, very dynamically morphing based on your inputs. So I'm seeing meaningful impact, meaningful experience. Those seem to be the common things, which are quite similar to what people have answered during the pre-event survey, where impact seems to be really one of the most important dimensions that everyone is looking at. I'm also seeing other words like sense of belonging, fun, friendship. So there definitely is some social element to this as well, right? Okay, we'll give probably a few more seconds for people to chime in. I see something here around being able to help or being able to give back. And I think going back to what Lynette and Shikin were talking about earlier, there is that sense of, to get that sense of fulfillment, right? We have to feel that whatever we are doing as volunteers is actually making a difference. And going back to how you design your experiences, how do you get people to feel that, I think is very important. Okay, so thank you for your responses. Now, moving on to the next question, let's expand on this. So based on your answers in the first question, if you were to try and imagine, what SSAs would you be volunteering with? Or whether it's an SSA or another organization, what can they do to make sure that you have the volunteer experience that you want? So if you answered meaningful impact, if you answered fulfillment, what are things that SSAs can do so that you can guarantee yourself that, okay, if I volunteer for this organization, I am going to make a meaningful impact? Some of these things might have been discussed earlier. Some of these might be your own ideas, new ideas that have popped up as a result of today's discussion. And as you input your responses, there's not going to be a word cloud this time. You can also, after a while, start voting for answers, just like how we're doing for the Q&A. Hopefully, we can also see which are the kind of popular ideas for us to get that volunteer experience that we want. So we're seeing some interesting points here around listening, connecting, valuing with volunteers, personable interactions, good exposure and training. Okay. Well thought out JD is also an answer here. currently the one with the most votes, sincere interactions and connection. I like the word sincere. I think as a volunteer, you're going in again to make an impact, to get a sense of fulfillment, and also to have fun. These sincere interactions really go a long way to make you feel that you're not just here to do work, that you're actually here to help and make a difference, right? Okay, maybe just a few more seconds for people to either get answers in or to vote on some of these things. So I think maybe to summarize, right, a lot of themes that we've been hearing so far, both from our two speakers and the responses that we're hearing, that we're seeing right now on the board. It seems like first, obviously people want to volunteer to make an impact, but in order to get the most out of their volunteers, similar to what Lynette and Chicken have done for their organizations, how do you create that approach to really listen and get feedback from your volunteers to know what exactly matters to them? And then how do you create those interactions, that connection with them, and how do you also get them on board? How do you train them? How do you make sure that they are equipped to do the work? Not all of the volunteer work we do is something that we are immediately experts at. So getting, structuring that experience and getting the volunteers to be onboarded properly is very important. Okay, so thank you for your responses and your likes so far. What we can do is we can move on to the last question. So this one is not necessarily connected to the second question, but again, like how I summarized some of those ideas earlier, we'd like to hear from the audience what has stood out to you so far from this activity. Whether it's things that the speakers have said, whether it's something that was discussed by Ken from NCSS when we talked about the Lien Centre research study, or even just again now that we're doing some reflection here, is there any ideas that stand out to you? Key takeaways so far from this session. Yeah. So we're seeing some responses come in. Volunteer profiling. I think there were some comments in the chat earlier talking about how they appreciated, the sharing around volunteer profiling. There's also another comment there about how quality VM makes a difference. I mean, that's a great takeaway. The focus of today's session is about how do we transform that volunteer experience. And again, if we all kind of elevate the way that we do our volunteer management and the way that we think about the experience, you can really feel the impact on not just your volunteers, not just your organization, but also the people that you serve. Yeah. Well thought out plans, understanding motivations. If you scroll up, please, I think there were some interesting responses there as well. A roadmap and acknowledge the volunteers. Yeah, I think having that roadmap of, and it's not just a singular roadmap, it can be a flexible roadmap, like what Lynette was saying, when they had certain roles in the Punggol Regional Library that maybe became a bit less relevant as time went by, you can continuously update your roadmap and keep the roles relevant for your participants. I like that someone also highlighted the part about highlighting what volunteers go through on social media. I think like what Ken said, a lot of people actually have an intention to volunteer. Sometimes they just don't know how to get started or where. So when you also do the social media engagement activities and you show people what volunteers are actually doing. I think that really helps create that awareness, and people will really start to have a picture in their heads of what that volunteer activity would look like. Right. Okay. Let's look at the top voted comments as well. I think there have been some votes that have been making their rounds. Yeah. Volunteer-centric perspective. Yeah. So again, hopefully, if we go back to our first question, where we think about ourselves as volunteers, I think that goes also a long way. Building that muscle, doing that exercise goes a long way in being able to figure out what might be important for your volunteers. And then, as someone pointed out in the third question, the constant engagement is key, which is why we also asked about how often you get feedback from your volunteers. Once you get constant feedback, you will continuously know what your volunteers are, what your volunteers are looking for, and how you can continuously tweak. It's an evolving journey. It's not a singular journey. Yeah. Okay. I think if we just go back to the last page, so thank you again to everyone that has shared, your key takeaways, ideas that have stood out. Hopefully, these are things that are concrete enough for you to take back to your organizations. And of course, we will be hearing more. This is not the end of the session, obviously. We will be hearing more, and we can build on some of these ideas that we have so far, right? Okay. So again, thank you everyone for your participation in our interactive activity. We can also capture your responses on Mentimeter and download that to be shared later. I think right now, where we're all kind of engaged and energized, now would be a good time to take our group photo. So for this group photo, we request that you turn on your camera or video. And since there are a lot of us, I think today we have about 150 plus people today. So since there are a lot of us, you'll have to give us time to capture multiple pages of your faces. And later I will be counting down from 3. And when I say volunteers, I'm not going to say cheese, but I'll say volunteer. Please hold your smiles and make a letter V on the camera. Just hold that for a few seconds, and we'll try to take the screenshots as fast as we can. Okay, so don't tire your facial muscles yet. Wait for me to count down and say volunteer. I'll give everyone a few more seconds to open their cameras and be part of the picture taking. Yeah. Okay, so for the admin team, I think if you are ready, let's start taking the pictures. All right, everyone, 3, 2, 1, volunteer. And just hold that. It'll take a few seconds to go through the different pages of faces and take screenshots. And to the Corn Ferry team, if you're done taking the pictures, just let us know.
Yep.
Okay, all good. Thank you everyone for holding your pose. Just massage your cheeks a little bit. maybe that's the longest smile we've had for a while. So just massage a bit and we'll get back to our program. All right. Thank you everyone again for participating in our group photo, and we hope you'll enjoy the photos when we share them later on. Okay. So moving on to our third speaker, we have Natalie Craig, who is the Managing Director of CNW Services in Singapore. So Natalie is Australian, born to Egyptian parents. She's a qualified Australian lawyer working in the facilities management and property industry in Singapore. So her background and experience make her believe in the importance of diversity and inclusion. And as a result of this, she also has a strong passion for people, which drives her commitment to service, including volunteering. Right. So we're really looking forward to hearing from her perspective coming from the corporate sector and seeing how CNW Services have shaped their own volunteer experience. Everyone, please welcome Natalie.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for having me. I'm just going to try and share my screen. I'm having some trouble sharing my, oh no, here we go. Sorry, my apologies. I hope you can now all see my screen. I'll just put it onto, I hope you can all see my screen now.
Not yet, Natalie.
Okay, it's uploading, hopefully.
Julius, maybe if you stop sharing, stop sharing first. There, okay, Natalie's screen now.
Yes, cool. Okay, sorry. Right. All right. Well, I've had a lovely introduction, so I won't spend too much time showing you my much better photo than in reality. Why don't I tell you a bit about my agenda for today? So I'm here to really give a corporate perspective on volunteering and tell you a bit about the corporate volunteering program that we run here at CNW Services. First and foremost, though, I do run a business, so I think it's my mandate or my obligation to tell you a little bit about our business first, and we'll also set the scene so that you can understand a little bit about our people and then the nature of the volunteering that we've entered into. So CNW Services is a facilities and engineering business. We're part of the global property services company Cushman & Wakefield, although our business here has been branded CNW Services for Singapore. We're one of the largest facilities management and asset services businesses in Singapore. We employ over 2,200 people just in Singapore, and we manage over 100 million square feet of real estate for our clients, again, just in Singapore. We procure services on behalf of those clients. We work with thousands of vendors around Singapore as well. We've been in operation here in Singapore for close to 50 years, actually, but we can really pinpoint our history from the 80s. But the thing about our business that is quite unique is that we actually had our foundations as part of government. So we originally started as part of the Housing Development Board, providing the facility services to the HDB developments as they were constructed. We then moved to become part of PMS, or Perdemco Land, which later became Capital Land, and then finally became our own independent facilities management company known as Premas. We've had many name changes and many ownership changes over the last 30 years. Premas, DTZ, UGL, finally CNW Services. What has remained at our core is that we are a facilities management and engineering service provider, but we also focus quite a lot of our time, energy, and effort on working with the Singapore government to manage their portfolio of properties and facilities. Here's just a snazzy looking wheel showing all of the different services that we provide here in Singapore. We have a sustainability and energy consulting team, as well as our traditional FM asset services and project management teams. So we're a team or a business of property managers, facilities managers, engineers, technicians, and energy consultants. Why would we want to run a volunteer program or a corporate volunteer program? Well, first and foremost, we're a services company, and a services company is in the business of service. So I think it lends itself very well to thinking about service more broadly. But there are a number of other principles that really guide us when we're looking at why we would have a program like this. The screen or the slide here shows you our corporate purpose and our corporate values, and this is our global purpose and global values. But we've really embraced those here in Singapore because they speak very much to what we're also trying to achieve here in Singapore. We really do believe that we have an important job to make an impact in the market here for our clients. And we're very passionate about being an inclusive and diverse workplace, a place that really recognizes, acknowledges, and supports people from all different backgrounds, abilities, beliefs, etc. The nature of the work that we do really requires us to believe in the importance of a team. And so we're very focused on creating teams, creating an environment and a spirit of collaboration, and being able to work together as effectively as possible. All of those things really come down to one fundamental truth. We might work in the real estate business, but we are fundamentally a people business. And so as a people business, that is what we sell. We sell the services of our people. And so as a people business and as a services business, I want to do two things. I want to create an environment at work for our people that engages them and motivates them and hopefully even inspires them to do their best and also to bring their best selves to their jobs. I see an important part of that being able to embrace everything that people value, and social responsibility is something that a lot of our people value. In the services industry, we find many people who might be doing this as their professional job and being paid for it, but they actually also must have a heart for service to be successful. And so engaging in a program that enables our teams to go out and serve in the community helps to develop that heart and actually makes us better at our jobs, as well as ensuring that the experience that our staff have is fulfilling across all elements of their role. We also have, as a corporation, a number of growing responsibilities when it comes to things like ESG, and the social element, the S in ESG, has a very strong social and corporate social responsibility component. As a listed company, we have to provide reporting around our ESG activities and our corporate social responsibility activities. So we have a mandate from a corporate perspective, which really helps and allows us to really pursue the passion that we really have for service and for volunteering. And here are just a number of different ways that we're ensuring that we are meeting those corporate and social responsibilities. We have had different elements and different programs of volunteering in our organisation now for about 3 years, but it's only in this last year that we are really trying to bring the benefit of being a large corporate with lots and lots of staff into a more organised program where we are using the benefit of having so many people in our organisation to really drive and help pursue some volunteering goals and bring that strength of people and skill to those volunteering programs and to work with the community. We are still in our infancy in terms of developing that more sophisticated program, but I wanted to share with you some of the things that we think have worked well so far and some of the goals that we have going forward. Firstly, one of the things that we've learnt makes a program successful is to make sure you have a clear owner within the corporation around who is going to be responsible for CSR or for a corporate volunteering program. For us, as a services business and as a business working in property, we have the ability to hire and to grow a workplace experience team. Most corporates now are very concerned about the workplace experience, and so we've grown a skill set and a capability around workplace experience. We also happen to have a workplace experience team who are incredibly passionate about community and community service. So it made perfect sense for us to combine our workplace experience and our community outreach activities together. Some businesses won't have the luxury of a workplace experience team, so these responsibilities can fall to HR or to ESG teams, or even to the business themselves. I'm not sure that it really matters where that ownership sits, but that it is really key that there be a team who really own the responsibility of supporting corporate volunteering and who are passionate about doing that. Our workplace experience team, I should say, are not just responsible for community outreach and community investment initiatives, they're also responsible for our staff engagement and staff experiences as a whole. So they do all sorts of things like bringing sustainable initiatives into our office, like our vertical garden. We have an incredibly noisy but very fun Christmas Kids at Work event that we run most years. And we also partner with a number of our employee resource groups that look at other elements of diversity and inclusion. We have a group called Leading with Education and Awareness of Disability, which tries to support people with disability in our organisation. Our community team then helps to create events and experiences that really promote the goals of our lead ERG. So they're a very busy team, but we are very grateful for them, and they've really driven some incredible engagement in our organisation. So we've talked about having to have the right owners for the programs internally inside a corporation. I think the next thing is to then make sure that we're engaging well with social services agencies. It's been very inspiring to be part of this afternoon's presentations and to see the passion and the skill and experience and expertise that the agencies presenting today have. So we need to make sure that we're also coming with the best of our people and with the best knowledge of what we can do to make sure that we're then partnering effectively with the social service agencies. One of the things that we are trying to do now is to really identify the core skills and expertise that our staff have internally that can be of benefit to social service agencies through a volunteering program. For us, for example, we are part of a large multinational corporation, but the business of C&W Services here is quite local. Most of our staff are Singaporean, although we do also draw on some foreign workers from Malaysia and India and other parts of Southeast Asia. But what that means is we have a group of individuals within our organisation that speak a multitude of languages, that come from many different backgrounds, that have different faiths and different perspectives. We also have an incredibly broad range of people in our organisation by age. I think our oldest staff member is in their 80s and our youngest has just turned 20. So we have presented to the agencies that we work with what we perceive to be important demographics around the staff that can volunteer and the skills and expertise that they also have. We've then been able to use that information to work collaboratively with the agencies to identify the activities that would best suit our workforce. We've also been able to raise with those agencies issues that we might experience because of the nature of our work. So, for example, any workplace restrictions that we might have. We have a number of staff that work out at client sites, so they can't often leave their post during the day, but they are quite passionate about working on the weekends. And by contrast, we have a large group of staff in our headquarters that are able to be more flexible and contribute to programs during the week, but perhaps want to savour their family time on the weekends. We've also made sure to collect questions and concerns from staff who have indicated an interest in volunteering and spoken with the agencies around that to make sure that training will be appropriate and directed towards meeting the concerns or questions of our staff. We haven't rushed into a program. We have taken time to consider and to plan, to spend time talking to the agencies to make sure that the program that we're implementing here will be suitable and will have the highest chance of success. We have invited staff who we know to be incredibly passionate about community work to be part of the planning process where that's been possible and has been productive to that outcome. And I think first and foremost, and so perhaps I should have started with this, but it is really fundamental, leadership support within the business is absolutely critical to making sure that this program will work. I'm very passionate about community service and community engagement, so I have been publicly supportive and I participate as much as I can in all of the activities that we run. But it's not just enough for me. I am one of a number of leaders within the organisation, so I've also reached out and really strongly encouraged all of the leadership to participate. And I'm very pleased to say that all of my leadership team have all participated in at least one or more volunteering activities. And the visual of seeing those leaders commit has been a big part of driving a really active and engaged volunteering team. Our workplace experience team are very creative, and they've also been thinking about other ways to make sure that our staff are encouraged, incentivized, and driven to participate in volunteering. Firstly, you'll see in the photo on the slide that all of our staff are wearing t-shirts, volunteer t-shirts. So we do know that our teams like a bit of merchandise. So everybody that participates in our program is given a t-shirt, and they're encouraged to wear that when they're participating in our programs. It does a number of things. It helps unite the team. It helps drive that sense of unity and collaboration. And it's also, from a safety perspective, I think better to see that our team is all together and easily identifiable. They've also come up with essentially a game or an incentive program around volunteering. They've called it Coming Forward Perks, and it was started just in June. So we started that program as part of rolling out a number of additional and more regular volunteering activities. And the goal was to motivate and engage our staff and to increase the total number of volunteers to make sure that we wouldn't find ourselves without sufficient numbers of volunteers to actually meet our obligations under the program. The program is essentially recognition and appreciation for our staff. So each time our staff participate in a volunteering day or a project day, they just complete a very easy online form called the points accumulation form. Those points are then recorded, and there's a certain number of points for each activity. And if a staff member achieves a certain number of points, they will get a CapitaLand voucher redeemed to them. And then they can spend that however they want. This is all done digitally, so there's no paperwork involved. It's fairly low maintenance from an administrative perspective, but we're finding that it's not going to be the reason our volunteers will come and participate, but it's definitely going to be a consideration to whether or not they come back. And so we're optimistic that this is going to continue to work and help us drive our volunteer program. So I just wanted to share with you, after all of that work, here are just some of the highlights of our program for the year and some of the activities that we've been involved in. By talking to various SSAs and by thinking and planning carefully around our program, what we've identified is we need opportunities that do several things. We need opportunities that are one-off, that people can join on a one-off basis if they have the time and if it's an activity that they feel particularly passionate about. We also need activities that can be more financial rather than time-based, because some people have means to give and not necessarily time to give. And then we also want to have activities that are more regular, where our staff can grow in their connection with their community, that they can grow and improve in their own skill set in that volunteering program. And so because of that, we've ended up with a variety of activities. So we have a digital ambassador program working with one of the aged care agencies in our local area here in Chai Chee, where our staff from our business will sit and have lunch with members of the sort of more elderly community from around our neighbouring areas. Those community members will actually come into our office, where we will host them for lunch, and then a lovely young person from our office will sit and help them use their phone better or use whatever digital skills they want to learn. That young person will sit and help them learn how to do it. It's empowering for our young people because phones and digital skills is something that comes very naturally to them. And we think it's very uplifting for some of these elderly to come into an office setting. Our office is just recently renovated, so it's fresh and new and bright. So they get to come into the office, have lunch, have a chat with a number of different staff members, and then learn a new skill around using their phones better. This happens on a monthly basis, and we have we've had a lot of support and engagement from our staff to participate. Also within the Kembangan Chai Chee Community Hub, we do a number of other more one-off ad hoc initiatives, things like voucher distribution, fruit and vegetable rescue. These are all things that happen on the weekend and don't impact on work time. We've also partnered with Muhammadiyah Welfare Home, which is a wonderful home looking after boys from more disadvantaged communities. We've just recently held a charity auction where we've done some fundraising for them. Again, a one-off, allowing some of our people to give more generously with their money rather than just their time. And we've ended up with some great outcomes for that home. A couple of others. Again, we are really supporting the aged care services in this area because we understand that that's an area of significant need. So we're working with Sparkle Care around providing some volunteering for some of their activities. We also do an annual food drive for the AIN Society being a group that looks after children who are, or people who are struggling with cancer and going through cancer treatment, and also their families. And finally, we also do a regular blood drive to ensure our staff are donating blood on a regular basis. Here's just a video I thought I'd share. One of our young people doing a push-up for you, but before I share the video, or I might share the video and then I could talk about it. I hope the sound will work. We put these videos together on quite a regular basis when we are starting with a new program, and we share these videos internally and also on social media, and we do it for a number of reasons. It's an important way that we can actually acknowledge those who are participating in our activities. We also are able to get the message out in terms of our own commitment to corporate social responsibility, and that's something we're quite proud of and want it to be a core part of how we're branding ourselves. But really, it becomes a really good way to tell the story internally and to recognise our staff for their participation, and is one of the ways that we really can communicate better than any kind of email or EDM or any other message about the benefits of participating in these kinds of programs. I think I had one more. This is one of my favourite videos. I'll just quickly show that to you. So we found this way of storytelling to be really impactful and has really helped to us to increase awareness of the activities that we participate in as part of our program. Finally, I just probably need to share with you what our staff think. You know, as a leadership team, I'm passionate about it. Our agencies we work with so far have said that they're happy to be working with us, but what do our staff really think about it? Well, here's just an example of some of the ways that we make sure we get feedback from our staff. So at the end of each of the programs, we do a quick survey with our staff, and generally our survey results show pretty high levels of satisfaction with the program. Where we've received particularly negative feedback, we'll always touch base with that staff member to make sure that they're okay. If there was an issue with the actual experience, that we're resolving it and that we're learning from it to move on. I had some attendance statistics. They seem to have fallen out of my presentation, but in general, we're seeing an increasing number of participants across each of our programs on a regular basis. I think if we compare this year to last year, our participation has nearly tripled in size. I have a personal goal that isn't going to be a KPI, but just a personal goal that I have, that I would love to see 50% of our workforce at least commit to volunteering once, and about 20% of our workforce regularly committing to volunteering. So far, we are probably at about 35% of our total workforce who has at least committed to one experience as a volunteer. And I'm still collecting the data on our regular volunteers. So we're on our way. And I think it's good to have goals like that as well to help guide us. I think I might be over time, so I don't want to take too much more time, but our workplace experience teams, really passionate about what they do. These are some comments from them in terms of why they do it and why they're passionate about continuing to drive our corporate social responsibility program. And these are our two wonderful workplace experience leaders who really are just so talented, and we're very, very lucky to have them. Please don't approach them for jobs. I have to keep them. And finally, just a few comments from our staff. So generally speaking, we are seeing our staff enjoy the experience because they feel needed, or they feel that they've learned something more about the needs within the community. And finally, they often feel that they've been of use, and that purposeful, that making an impact, that sense of purpose is really what is driving them to participate. So I hope that was helpful. Thank you again for having me. And I'll hand back to Andrew.
All right, thank you so much, Natalie, for sharing. I think it was great to really see the videos. Those really kind of give us that real flavor of, okay, this is what happens. And I think, as some people in the chat are saying, it's really evident that people are having fun. And you know that that's not just a one-time thing. If your statistics say that your volunteer participation has tripled in the past year, like whatever your team is doing is definitely working. So great to hear that, and thank you so much for sharing. Yeah. Okay. So now we are going to move into the Q&A panel session. So this is going to be a panel discussion with all the speakers. Once again, we are going to show this QR code to you for those that have not seen it. There's also going to be a link in the chat. So for those of you that have already asked questions, thank you so much, and we will be going through them this session. We will try our best to go through as many questions as we can, time permitted. I think the important thing for us in this session is to get that quality discussion from all three speakers in response to your questions, of course, right? So I think without further ado, let's focus on ourselves as let's welcome back Lynette, Chicken, and of course, Natalie, and we can start the Q&A panel. Okay, everyone, welcome back. Thank you so much again for all the sharing that you have done this afternoon. There is actually one question in our Q&A panel that has kind of stayed at the top of the number of votes. And this is actually quite an important question given everything that we've discussed today. The question is, how do you streamline the volunteer management process if you're managing the group of volunteers and individuals all by yourself? So I guess, if we think about CNW having quite a sizable team and dedicated people to work on that, same with NLB and Dementia SG. What if you're a bit more resource constrained? And we talked about the effort that it takes to continuously collect feedback, think about the journey, all these things. How do you do that if you're the sole volunteer manager in your organization? Any of the speakers want to take it?
Oh, hi. Okay, maybe I can take that question from the perspective of a social service agency, where generally we are always very limited by resources and bandwidth. So if you're the only person doing volunteer management and you have your different groups of volunteers, how do you streamline the process? So for my team, because there are 3 of us, so you can have a dedicated person journeying with individual, dedicated person journeying with youth, and then dedicated person journeying with corporate volunteers. But if you just one person, I believe also it's about prioritization. Which group of volunteers will allow or create the resource that you need. Yeah, so if you feel that maybe currently for my organization, I need corporate volunteers who can come in with different skills, different support services, then you focus on getting your corporate volunteers. And then you can have the few key individual volunteers that you journey with. So when you journey with the individual volunteers, as you develop them, they could be your core volunteers to support you down the road to manage individual volunteers. Yeah. So that's my suggestion for my fellow volunteer managers who are alone in this journey. Please know that you're not alone. We are all in this together.
Thank you, Shikin. I mean, at the end of the day, yes, prioritization, right? It's like most other work that we do. If we are bombarded, if we have a lot to do, it's about finding which is most impactful, most valuable for your organization and prioritizing your efforts on that. Yeah. Do either Natalie or Lynette want to chip in?
Yeah, so maybe I can add on. So like in NLB, I mentioned that we have like a network of volunteer management officers on the ground who have volunteer management as part of their portfolio, and it really helps to have like this sort of network of people involved in managing the volunteers. But what we also tell our front-facing colleagues is that actually anyone who faces our customers has some role to play in engaging volunteers as well. It's not like these volunteers can only be, you only talk to volunteer if your job is volunteer management and no one else can help in that process. So I would say perhaps if you feel like you're all alone doing the volunteer management job, there's actually a role that your colleague can play, even though volunteer management might not be their main role. It could be as simple as, they help to check them in or say hello. So at least some of the little bits of the work are like kind of shared out across your colleagues, even if it is not their main job. I'm not sure if that helps to answer the question, but it's something that we have encountered in NLB as well.
Thank you, Lynette. I mean, at the end of the day, everyone has touch points with our volunteers, right? So all these ideas, all these insights about what matters to your volunteers that can come from multiple places in the organization. And Natalie, sorry, I think I might have cut you off. Were you going to say something?
No, I think the answers from my colleagues is more than enough. I don't think I could add any more.
Okay. So thank you for your answers. Now the next question that we have was actually initially directed to Lynette, but I think this can also kind of extend to both Shikin and Natalie. So the question is, to what extent are the staff in NLB managing the volunteers and actively encouraging volunteers, plus contributing to a good volunteer experience? Or do the volunteer leaders within your volunteer groups play some of that role and help kind of balance the load?
Hi, so I would say that this is the question of like who does most of the engagement work. I would say it still falls mostly on the staff. Firstly, because you do need to put in a good amount of engagement to even cultivate some volunteer leaders. And secondly, not every role, not every branch has these volunteer leaders. So when they are not present, it does come back to the staff to do that work. And also staff do some of the things that, a volunteer leader cannot do. So for example, questions about the organization, they're still fronted by the staff. Some of the administrative work, which is part of the volunteer, end-to-end journey, staff has to do that as well. So volunteer leaders, I think, help to enhance the experience for newer volunteers, but the staff still take on most of the loading. Yeah, I don't know if that answers the question of whoever asked this. So you can clarify if you want.
Do you see the same, Shikin, from your side? Like, would you say it's also similar for your organization?
Yeah, I echo that. Similarly, is for Dementia Singapore, we're in the space where we are hoping to cultivate volunteer leaders down the road sooner than later. So in cultivating our group of our volunteer leaders, there needs to be the tight connection with the volunteers, the core connection. These are the volunteers who hopefully will be our core volunteers. So in this initial phase of engagement, it is very targeted where we journey with our volunteers. So you have your dedicated VM manager, your VMP. And then also as you go about your volunteering engagement, our colleagues at the center or for our colleagues across different departments also engage with our volunteers. And from what we hear from volunteers, that's really positive because they get to hear from other perspectives, not just from me and team, but also from colleagues who are on the ground, colleagues who are doing fundraising, colleagues who are doing advocacy and communications.
Okay, thank you, Shikin. And maybe Natalie, from the corporate perspective, like you've talked about the role that your workplace experience managers play, and so how closely are they involved with the SSAs in trying to design some of these activities? Yeah.
So it's that team that primarily take the responsibility for working with the SSAs to design the activities. But in terms of then encouraging volunteers, that's something that they share with the business leaders. And then once we have actually identified a group of volunteers, typically those that volunteer first are the most passionate, then we try to use them as champions within our business. So they will go out and talk to their peer groups, try and encourage more teams to come forward and volunteer together. So we do try to share that responsibility out when it comes to actually cultivating a group of volunteers, but the original design we keep to a limited group.
I like your use of the word champions, and I think this concept is not just about championing within a business or an organization. I mean, even if you have individual volunteers, if they really like the experience that they have with your organization, they will also be champions to their friends, to their family, and as many of you pointed out during the interactive activity, that you would volunteer if this was something that was fun for you, something that you found enjoyment in. So who wouldn't be telling their friends and family and so on to join them in these activities if they really had a good experience, right? So thank you all for sharing that. The next question is actually directed to you, Natalie. Did you face any challenges in engaging the SSAs with meeting the needs of your staff volunteers? So you're talking about how do you map the skills, the unique skill sets that your people have, that your staff have. How is that discussion happening with the SSAs, and were there challenges in kind of making those two goals meet? Yeah.
Yes, there are some challenges. I think when we have come and shown passion and excitement for volunteering, then we can excite or perhaps overexcite some of the agencies, and then we can dream very, very big, and suddenly all of our full-time jobs will be turned towards volunteering, and we forget that we're here to help run a business. So I think the thing we've probably struggled with is starting with these big, quite audacious goals, and then having to work back to make sure that what we're going to commit to is sustainable and achievable. So for example, one of the things that we looked at for a while was we have a very mobile workforce. So we have vans, because we have technicians that have vans and trucks and all sorts of vehicles. So we've had agencies that want our teams to perhaps help with moving materials or even moving people around. And so while in theory we can do that, we've had to stop and say, okay, what are the insurance implications? What are the safety implications? What happens if that team working or volunteering that day is needed for an emergency at our work? How do we make sure that those things don't actually create failure for the program? And so we've had to step away from that particular activity for now because we can't resolve those issues yet. So yeah, we start with big goals, and then we have to make sure that whatever we're going to commit to is achievable. And that's the process of working through.
And I think to create that sense of fulfillment or success, I think being cautious not to overcommit what you can do will really help set those expectations between the SSAs and the corporates. Thank you. Actually, that's somewhat related to the next question, but this is a more general question for all three speakers. So Natalie just talked about what are the capabilities and how do you then map that to the activities that you can do. How about when it comes to developing the skill sets of the people that are volunteering? Is there some kind of training roadmap that you have for the volunteers to further develop them? And I think maybe some of these ideas were touched on slightly with how we redesign roles and so on, but is there do you typically have like a longer term roadmap in which you can build some of this?
Okay, I can go first. Okay, over at Dementia Singapore, we are very intentional and very firm about training our volunteers across different groups for individual volunteers, corporate, as well as youth volunteers. So the initial training for every volunteers, regardless of activity, is Dementia 101. Dementia, we find that sharing Dementia 101, it is beneficial not just to support the volunteers in their role, but it is knowledge that they can take away. Yeah, understanding what is dementia, signs and symptoms, how do you reduce risk factors, how do you communicate with persons living with dementia. So every time when a volunteer comes, regardless of role, you have to go through this mandatory training. And for our individual volunteers, if they decide to take on another role, for instance, they decide to take up a volunteer befriending role at a home-based setting, we will provide a different level of training. If we are not able to deliver the training ourselves, we partner with our partners out there to deliver training that is complementary to their roles. Yeah. So over at Dementia Singapore, all our volunteers must go through baseline training. For corporates, training can look like before the engagement session where we have a briefing, or even us going to our corporate volunteers offices to deliver training sessions, training workshops to support our volunteers.
Those training workshops, meaning even before that corporate gets involved in actually doing activities, they are already receiving some kind of training or informational sessions, right? Sharing
of dementia related knowledge across different execution formats.
Okay. How about the others? Is there anything that you might be able to share about roadmaps and so
on? So I guess I will try to answer. So I think for NLB, we do have sort of the pre-volunteering training and briefings as well. But if the question is about a long-term roadmap, I would say it's something we aspire to do, but we are sort of still muddling our way there. So we have more established programs which have a fairly sort of well set up training program. An example is we have volunteer storytellers. We've had them for many years, and there is sort of like quite a fixed training, not really a roadmap, but a series of trainings by now. But for other roles, like I mentioned, there are quite a number of different roles across NLB, and it's not quite possible for us to have training roadmaps, long-term plans for every single role. So one of the things we are trying to do is to group together roles which like maybe have overlaps or similarities to see whether they can be sort of like upgraded into like a bit of a program. So for example, can volunteers who are doing user education be eventually moved up the ladder to do guiding, and then after that the guiders can move up the ladder to do different kinds of tours. So it's something that we're thinking about, but it's really quite premature. I would say that like, because again, prioritization is always an issue. What we have prioritized more in terms of training is training our own staff. Training our own staff to engage volunteers, and also to train the volunteers on the ground in a way that is easy for the volunteers to pick up. The material is digestible. They communicate sort of clearly. So I would say that it really is a balance of where we kind of invest our training resources. We really only have like 1.5 people doing training full time. So that's just, I guess, where we are. Thank you.
Okay.
I might just add, we are yet to really tie. I mean, we will always make sure that we're working with the SSAs to get the right training for our staff, but we are yet to really think about how this training can help to enhance the skill sets of our staff overall. And it's perhaps one thing I might just suggest, if there is a way that SSAs can identify some of the competencies that can be developed from participating in volunteering programs and the training that goes with it, that I think will really help corporates to then look at how the volunteering can actually fit in with an overall learning and development plan for their staff, and might even allow for greater participation. So it's something to think about if possible. I think that would be something we'd be interested in.
Like general competencies that may be related to competencies that you want to develop, for example, in the corporate.
Exactly. Particularly around those soft skills, because a lot of it will come down to things like communication and interaction and even negotiation. And if those sorts of competencies can be identified, I think that would be quite useful to corporates.
Yeah. And there is actually a follow-up in the chat that is somewhat related to what we are discussing now before I move on to the next question. So we just talked about roadmaps and the training that you do. There are some volunteers that might feel that some of this onboarding or training may not be that necessary, or maybe in a way like part of the initial friction or roadblock to get them started on actually volunteering. How do you deal with these situations, and how do you, I guess, balance, getting people onboarded and trained enough so that the basics, the foundations are there so that they can actually be can actually be adding value when they are volunteering, versus doing too much of it that it becomes a bit of a chore for some of these volunteers. It affects their flexibility somewhat.
I'm unmuted, so I might start. I think the benefit of training, or the sort of key reasons for training, whether that's things like safety, risk. I think those things have to be perhaps communicated so that volunteers understand the purpose of the training. But it may also be an opportunity to relook at the training. Is it highly administrative? Are there things that can be reduced or improved to make the process a little bit more seamless? They would be my suggestions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like what you shared, like, reframing the training to talk about the benefit of the training. For my side, for Dementia Singapore, training is mandatory. Yeah, mandatory in that it is a process, it is a policy. Yeah. So for volunteers who are, who are very excited, who want to contribute to the dementia community, of course, we will advise them, okay, this is the whole process after our qualifying questions, because we also want to ascertain how can we intentionally journey with this volunteer. So we have our qualifying questions, and then if we feel that, okay, this may be the right fit, then we'll share, you have to attend the training. So if volunteers who are not keen, then we just have to be firm to say that, hey, this is a policy that you have to go through the mandatory training, have to make time for the mandatory training. Yeah, but I do like what Natalie shared. Perhaps also in our conversation with future volunteers, we could also just highlight the benefit upfront over the process.
All right, thanks, Shikin. So there's another question regarding the volunteer survey that Ken was talking about earlier. So just for everyone's information, after this, when we do send out our kind of thank you emails and so on, we can link you to the research study, the official report and brochure for the research study. So you can also refer back to that and understand the details of the research that Ken was summarizing earlier today. Yeah. Here's an interesting question that is actually directed to Shikin, but after Shikin responds, maybe either Natalie or Lynette may want to chime in case you have something to say. So in your work in Dementia Singapore, there are times when the staff have to support the volunteers, because when you're helping out patients with dementia, some of that work can be emotionally heavy or emotionally draining. And so sometimes the volunteer, although they really want to help, sometimes they find themselves needing a bit of extra support. Do you see that happen? And how do you kind of get your staff to be able to deal with those kinds of situations?
Okay, yeah, that is a very good question. This is particularly relevant for our volunteer befrienders who's a befriender to either a person living with dementia or a caregiver. So it goes down to the baseline of training. So in training, we will cover, of course, the essential dementia information, befriending, and then also about setting emotional boundary. Setting emotional boundary when you engage in your interaction with person living with dementia or their caregivers. This is an example of one volunteer program where I see this happening very prevalently. So also on that front, we do have regular check-ins with our volunteer VM team. So the three VM practitioners, we do check in with our volunteers, and also for our colleagues who are on the ground. If they see certain things that needs to be highlighted, they will share with us. But we will always be the person to journey with the volunteers to process what needs to be processed and to remind the volunteers of what was covered in training. Like, when you engage with a caregiver, befriended to caregiver, putting up the emotional boundary and not trying to absorb everything that's shared. Just to share with you an example where this is really very relevant for me right now.
Yes, thank you. I think um that point about setting emotional boundaries is very important. And also, again, going back to the training, right? It's not just something that we do as part of the process, as part of the requirement. This will really help the volunteers also navigate their way to these tough situations, right?
And also, if I may just add, creating that space for volunteers to share how they feel about the whole experience. Yeah, sharing the positive as well as sharing maybe things that are not comfortable. Yeah, we want to create that space. And if the volunteer feels that, okay, this is maybe not it for me, we'll just process it and, okay, we'll just move along to see how we can have the volunteer maybe support in another role.
Okay. Okay. Any follow-up thoughts from either Natalie or Lynette?
I might just relay from other experiences. When I worked in Australia as a lawyer, I did some volunteer work in a community legal centre dealing with people from significantly disadvantaged communities, sometimes with domestic violence related issues. So they were very heavy loads to carry. And the practice we had in the legal centre was we would always make sure that we did a debrief immediately after we finished our shift, so that nobody carried that alone into their day or at home. And I found that very effective. We don't have a formal debriefing process yet here, but we may need to look at it. But so far, the activities that we're involved in tend to have more positive outcomes than, say, some of the work I just referenced. But one of the things we're focused on is that none of our staff ever go and participate in these things alone, that we will always do it in groups. And typically we'll try to pair people or group people with other staff that they know, so that there is naturally an ability to undertake a debrief, even if it's on a more informal basis. But we do see that as being a very important part of being able to manage any kind of stress that related to the volunteering experience.
Thank you, Natalie. And yes, I think that debrief after every session is really, really important. I think many, let's say first responders, I think also probably go through a similar process. Yeah. We probably have time for just one more question. And this is actually directed to Natalie, and something that might be quite relevant that many SSAs here will want to hear about. So what are key attributes that would lead a corporate organization to take on or to partner with a particular SSA? Like, what are you looking for in your SSA partners before you get your whole team involved?
Okay. We are looking for passion. So when we meet people who are excited about what their agency is doing, it is infectious. We can't help but also then want to get involved. And then we also really are looking for an agency that wants to be collaborative, that wants to learn about our business and our people, and wants to then work together to achieve an outcome. So agencies that come and say, I need 10 people, I need them 5 days a week, I need them, and it doesn't give us an opportunity to kind of work to then understand what's possible, makes it harder for us. But one that says, what is your talent? What are you able to contribute, and then can work collaboratively to get an outcome? That combined with the passion for the cause, they're the things that we're looking for.
I'm recalling one of the answers in the interactive activity earlier, sincere interactions. I think if it feels more like another work transaction where I need to provide X number of people, it can be very challenging. So I think, again, tying back to how do we get people to be more connected to the cause, which is one of the main things that we wanted to improve as SSAs. It's about getting that infectious passion for your cause to be felt by the people that you may be working with, whether it's your volunteers and whether it's your corporate partners. Yeah. Okay. So I think with that, we are almost out of time. Thank you very much to our speakers, Natalie, Shikin, Lynette, for joining us on this panel, on this Q&A panel. Hopefully, and to the audience as well, thank you for asking your questions. Hopefully, we were able to kind of answer them in a good level of detail and have good discussion around that. Now, before we end today's session, we would just really appreciate just a few more minutes of your time, just a little bit more. Your feedback will help us improve the quality of these sessions. We're, again, similar to what we talked about today on how we listen to our volunteers and further improve that experience. We also want to listen to you today to improve the quality of these sessions. So you can scan the QR code here on this slide, or you can also click on the link that was just dropped into the chat for a quite short survey, and it should only take you a few minutes to fill this up. All right. Okay. All right. So while you are all filling out your surveys, once again, we really appreciate everyone's presence this afternoon, and we hope you had a great time. We hope you learned a lot, taken home some, good ideas, new ideas that you might want to implement in your own organizations. And just to remind everyone about our future sessions in this year's series, for those of you that did not see this slide earlier on, please mark the following dates on your calendars. These will be the next sessions in this year's Volunteer Management Network. We're looking forward to seeing you in the next session that's going to be on the 15th of November, and stay tuned from NCSS again for more updates. All right. Once again, my name is Andrew Yap from Corn Ferry, and it was a pleasure to be your MC for this afternoon. So thank you to all participants, all speakers, our event team, and of course to NCSS for hosting this and making sure that we all kind of learn from each other and improve the way that we do our volunteer management. So I hope you all have a good day and see you next time. Please don't forget to answer the survey before you go. That will really help us make the future sessions better. Thank you, everyone.